Thank you for joining me on this episode of The Gospel Truth. I'm your host, Marla Wilson. And over here in The Gospel Truth, we're engaging the culture with Christian truth. And in that, we engage the culture by having interviews and lessons and having debates. And I have another debate for you today. But before I bring the participants in, Andrew Rappaport and Steve Bonnell, before I bring those guys in, I do want to go over some of the upcoming shows, some of the updates that I have for the show. October 1st, I have Miles Patrick versus Ricky Cronin, and they're debating, is Jesus God? The interpretation of Deuteronomy 28, and do we need to obey the law for salvation? Ricky Cronin is a Reformed Christian, and Miles Patrick is a Black Hebrew Israelite. So that should be an interesting debate. That should be a live debate, a long one at that. Got 3 subject matters there. October 5th, I have Scarlett Clay versus Gina Belk. If you don't know Gina Belk, she is from the Atheist Experience. She's a co-host with Matt Dillahunty. So she's jumped on here, and I got Scarlett Clay, who has studied at Biola. She has a master's degree in apologetics at Biola. So that's going to be an interesting debate. And I also add that Scarlett Clay and Gina Belk are my first female debate participants. So that's big for this ministry. And they'll be debating, are Christians epistemologically justified to believe in God? So that should be a very interesting subject right there. Also have Taylor Gray. He calls himself The Snake is Right on his YouTube channel. And he'll be going up against Miles Kettleson. And they'll be debating, can atheism account for objective morality? And that's coming up October 6th. So that should be a good one as well. And I also have Anthony Rogers versus Armin Navadi. And that's going to be a big debate. October 16th, they'll be debating the value of Christianity. So that should be exciting. We have a whole bunch of shows. That's just the next 4 shows. We have a whole bunch of shows coming up, debates, interviews, and lessons. And speaking of lessons, be on the lookout on my part two of my 2-part series, Jesus in the Old Testament. So be on the lookout for that. That's going to be coming soon. So with that said, I do want to bring these guys in and let these guys introduce themselves. I have Andrew Rappaport, who I met online through Facebook and the whole nine, and he's actually been on my show before. And apparently, I didn't get this note, but apparently, when somebody bring him on the show, I'm supposed to get a book. But he clarified that. I want a book, Andrew. And he clarified that statement that he said, well, I have to come on and talk about the subject matter of his book. And we didn't really talk about the subject matter of his book, so it's all good. But I plan on getting him on so I can get my book. I want my book, Andrew. But Andrew's a great guy, man. He's such a blessing. I learned a lot from him, watching his YouTube videos and everything. So I'm going to allow Andrew to come in and introduce himself and just so he can express how much of a blessing he is to everybody. Go ahead, Andrew. You got it, man.
To get a free book.
Yeah, I want a free book, Andrew.
You know, you should have been Jewish like me. You have the understanding of the value of free. So I'm Andrew Rappaport. I am with Striving for Eternity Ministries, and as I just said, I'm from a Jewish background. So I converted into Christianity, and I started the ministry because basically I look to disciple Christians, to evangelize, to apologetics, better defend the faith in Christian living. So I was a pastor at a Chinese American church for many years and stepped down from there and got into public speaking. And so not by choice, but that's what I ended up doing because people were asking me to travel to speak at conferences and things. So I travel around the world and speak, and I write books. Got What Do They Believe, which is a book on Western religions, the major Western religions, and then I have a book on What Do We Believe, which is a book on Christian theology, and I'm working on a book on the deity of Christ, the claims of the Christ through just the Gospels. So I do a lot of podcasting, as you know, but I'm the executive director of the Christian podcast community. So I have Andrew Rappaport's Rappaport, which is a weekly podcast. I have a daily Monday through Friday 2-minute podcast called Andrew Rappaport's Daily Rappaport. And then a more lively one is every Thursday night we do Apologetics Live, which is not a formal debate, although sometimes we do formal debates there, but we have 2-hour show where we have anyone comes in, asks whatever questions they have. This week, I'm going to have Dr. Jason Lyle, astrophysicist, in. So if there's any people that ever wanted to ask him a question, you can come on in. Just go to apologeticslive.com. And then I have a podcast for podcasters. So You Want to Be a Podcaster is the name of that one. So that's enough about me.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate you once again for coming on, participating in this debate. Okay, Stephen, go ahead and give a quick introduction of yourself.
Hey, what's up? I'm Stephen Bonnell. People online call me Destiny. I stream on Twitch, and I have a YouTube channel, both called Destiny, and I do video games and then politics and philosophy, which I'm guessing is why I'm here, for the politics and philosophy, not the video games. And yeah, I guess spiritually I would be considered an atheist or an agnostic. And yeah.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. That's it, Stephen. That's how you going to give me, Stephen?
Yeah, that's where we're at.
All right, good. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate you being here, man. I really do appreciate you taking time with your schedule, man. Mm-hmm. All right, fellas. So we go get this show on the road. Once again, I appreciate both of you coming on, participating in this debate. So with that said, let me go ahead and run down the format. We're going to have a 5 to 10 minute opening statements, and then we're going to about a 60-minute discussion with Crossfire. Each participant will get a total of 30 minutes of Crossfire. So after 10 minutes expire from one person, the next person gets 10 minutes until the expiration of the full Crossfire time. And then we'll go into closing statements. If I have any questions after the Crossfire, I'll introduce those questions after the Crossfire. But if I don't, we'll go right into the closing statements, and then we'll close out the debate from that point, and then we'll head on out of here. Everything's cool with that?
Yeah, sounds good.
Sounds good.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good.
Afterwards, Stephen teaches me how to do some video gaming. Cool.
Yeah, for sure, man. You got to put us up on game on that, Steve. Come on, man. All right. With that said, Stephen, you are arguing the affirmative is secular humanism superior to Christianity. You are arguing affirmative, so you go first for your opening statement.
Okay, so basically my position is that if we're going to make the best decisions about how to further human existence and human happiness, it's better to look at facts in like an objective light or an objective manner. So it's really important that we are taking a truthful look at the world around us. And when it comes to spirituality, it seems like it's really hard to justify any type of supernatural claims about existence or what happens after existence or anything like that. So my affirmative for secular humanism, I guess, is basically just an appeal to making sure that when we're doing investigations of the world around us, we're like looking into what are the most fact-based positions so that we can make the best decisions possible to make people's lives better. And yeah.
All right. That is quick. What that? 2 minutes? 2 minutes, Steve. All right. All right, Andrew, you got it, man. You can go ahead, go for your opening statement.
Stephen, for coming in to have this debate, and for Marlon for hosting it. Although that was a really short opening, I might go a little bit longer. Basically, here's the thing that we're going to see that in this debate. It is interesting because right off the bat, we see the talk about objectivity. Now, I asked for a definition of terms from Stephen, terms of what is superior, secular humanism, Christianity. So superior, he's defined as better than. Secular humanism as appreciation or love of humanity without the need of a higher power. Christianity, collection of beliefs inspired by the Bible. I asked him a question of, do we have a free will? He's are we just chemical entities, product of the brain? He said, nope, it's all just chemicals and causality, matey. So basically, I asked those questions for a reason, to see if he believes in a free will. We'll get to that in a bit. But here's what you end up seeing is we have to go to an objective standard. This debate is secular humanism superior to Christianity to Stephen or others who agree with them? That's not the debate. No, Stephen's the debate is the question of is secular humanism itself, by definition, better than Christianity? That's what Stephen's going to have to prove, but he has to do it from an objective standard. And that's what's needed for this. Now, if we're just chemical reactions, there is no objective standard. You cannot appeal to an objective standard with saying everything's just chemicals. So you first need to have a standard to go by. Now, when we talk about the many things I anticipate that he will bring up, he's probably going to bring up many things that he's going to see in the Bible that are objectionable, that he's going to have. Now, the issue there is, by what standard is he appealing? He's going to have the argument that he can prove his worldview even exists without relying on Well, God. He's going to have to be able to prove that things like knowledge, laws of logic, truth, morality, concepts, you're hearing my voice. It is nothing but a vibration of air, but you understand the meanings of those words. If I suddenly start speaking in Cantonese, I don't think many of you would understand that. You understand those concepts, but that's an immaterial thing. He's got the burden to prove that's a material thing, because if there are immaterial entities, like I've mentioned, all these things he relies on, then the problem for him will be that his worldview itself relies on an immaterial source, because material matter cannot produce immaterial things. Therefore, it needs an immaterial source. That immaterial source we'd refer to as God. And so, therefore, he would end up having a self-defeating worldview. Now, there's a reason I asked about free will. I want to give a lengthy quote in my opening from a article called "There Is No Such Thing as Free Will" by Stephen Cave. Why do I quote this? Because this is someone who would agree with Stephen's argument from his positions, but it also ends up revealing that the claims he's going to make against Christianity, probably we'll see actually make a worse claim when we read this article about his. So here's a lengthy quote. In 2002, two psychologists had a simple but brilliant idea. Instead of speculating about what might be if people lost belief in their capacity to choose, they could run an experiment to find out. So Kayleen Voss, then at the University of Utah, and Jonathan Schooler of the University of Pittsburgh, asked one group of participants to read a passage arguing that free will was an illusion, and the other group to read a passage that it was neutral on the topic. Then they subjected the members of each group to a variety of temptations, and based on their behavior, would the differences of abstract philosophical beliefs influence people's decisions? Yes, indeed. When asked to take a math test with cheating made easy, the group primed to see free will as illusionary proved more likely to peek at the answers. When given the opportunity to steal, to take more money than they were due from an envelope of $1 coins, those that believed in free will had been more determined to pilfer on a range of measures. Voss told me she and Schooner found that, quote, people who are induced to believe less in free will are more likely to behave in immorality, unquote. If that seems that people stop believing, it seems that when people stop believing we are free agents, they stop seeing themselves as blameworthy for their actions. Consequently, their actions, they act less responsible and give in to their baser instincts. Voss emphasized that this result is not limited to the conceived conditions of their lab experiment. Quote, you see the same effects with people who naturally believe more or less in free will, unquote, she said. Another study, for instance, Voss and her colleagues measured the extent to which a group of day laborers believed in free will, then examined their performance on the job by looking at their supervisors' ratings. Those who believed strongly that they were in control of their own actions showed up for work on time, were more frequently showed up on time more frequently, and were rated by their supervisors as more capable. In fact, belief in free will turned out to be a better projection of job performance than the established measurement such as self-professed work ethic. Further, studies by Blomster and colleagues have linked the diminished belief in free will to stress, sense of life's meaning. Earlier this year, the researchers published a study showing that a weaker belief in free will correlates with poor academic performance. The list goes on. Believing that free will is an illusion has been shown to make people less creative, and more likely to conform, less willing to learn from their mistakes, and less grateful toward one another. In every regard, it seems that when we embrace determinism, we indulge in the dark side. So that's a lengthy quote, but their conclusion was, the article was making the point we have to pretend like there's a free will. Now, he's going to have to show how when we're just chemical reactions, all of the research that's been done is wrong. That would be my closing. That'd be my opening.
All right, thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you also, Steve, for your opening statements. All right, at this time, we'll be going to our cross-examination portion of the debate. All I ask is that we speak clearly and that we're able to give each other the proper responses and clear, concise questions. With that said, Steve, you have the first 10 minutes of your cross-examination of Andrew.
Okay, so I'm just going to run down, I guess, the stuff I wrote down, and I'll respond one at a time. So the first issue we're talking about related to determinism, we made a statement, if we're all just chemical reactions and there's no objective standard. I would say this is a non sequitur. Even if we are all just chemical reactions, there could still be objective standards. So for instance, if I roll a rock down a hill, there are objective standards by which I can measure, say, the harm caused by the rock on the way from the top to the bottom of the hill. I don't need there to be any type of free will or any type of whatever of the rock to just have an objective standard by which to measure things. So I reject that idea that if we are all just chemical reactions, we can't have some objective standard by which to measure things. I think we absolutely can. The second thing, the idea about like proving the laws of logic, this is a really common kind of like presuppositionalist talking point. It's obvious I can't prove the laws of logic. I would argue that these are things that just appear to be granted a priori to us. I can't really explain how they exist or why they exist. But when we get this fundamental or this foundational in our thought, you run into a lot of the same problems. So if I ask, if you ask me, well, can you prove, the laws of identity or non-contradiction? Then I would say, well, no, I just kind of assume they're real. And you say, aha, well, now your worldview is unjustified. I'll ask you, okay, well, how do you know they're real? You say, well, because God tells me. I'll say, well, how do you know that God is telling us? Well, I just know because divine revelation. Okay, so I call it a priori, you call it divine revelation. At the end of the day, we're in the same boat. The difference is I don't make any supernatural claims with my laws of logic. You do make a lot of supernatural claims. Maybe not you generally, or you specifically, but generally a religious person does make a lot of supernatural claims with where they get their a priori revelations from. So I prefer the simpler ones to the more complicated ones. We talk about immaterial things. You say concepts are immaterial things. I guess I disagree with that. I would argue that concepts don't really exist other than ideas in a human mind. So for instance, if I have a concept of a chair, if all of humanity is wiped out, that concept of a chair disappears because a chair is only a concept insofar as it's some collection of neurons that fire in people's brains when they bring up the concept of a chair. It's not something that exists in an immaterial fashion that people draw from or can have information from. It's just a kind of a shared language thing where we all talk to each other, we create these universal concepts, and then we kind of agree about them. Even if I did, I would never grant that concepts are immaterial things that exist. But even if I did grant that, just because concepts were immaterial doesn't necessitate a free God as well. Or doesn't necessitate a Christian God or any type of God, actually. There are a multitude of immaterial worlds that we could imagine where these concepts come from, and plenty of these don't require any sort of God-like figure at all. It could be aliens, it could be the Matrix, there's a trillion different ways. And the challenge for you there is always going to be, for what I ask is, how do you get information about said immaterial world? Because the only way you're going to be able to do it is from material sources, so things like the Bible or a priest speaking to you, which are all things that have their own problems when it comes to verifying the validity of them. And then obviously the questions of how do they access these immaterial truths. We talked about a bunch of experiments where people that are shown to have less free will are less likely to be moral. I wouldn't contest the results of any of these, and in the Western world especially, I mean, we talk about free will a lot. It's a really important thing for a lot of people. So it wouldn't surprise me that if you told them, like, hey, by the way, free will maybe isn't really the way that you think it is, that people kind of like give up a lot in terms of how they view the world. I mean, it's kind of similar to when every Christian that's made a journey to being an atheist has had a period in their lives where, oh, it feels like nothing matters because I've lost my religion and I don't have a way to evaluate what's good or bad or anything. But I mean, you get over it after a time, and you learn that there are plenty of other ways that you can determine what is right or wrong. You don't need religion to do it. I imagine if you take free will away from people, that you could probably walk them down the same path where, you know, initially they're like, oh, well, if I have no free will, I should just be evil anyway. And then you realize, okay, well, hold on. If everybody acted this way, life would be pretty miserable and pretty horrible. Well, okay, even if I don't have free will, we can still act as though we do, because humans engage with topics emotionally, not just intellectually.
Hey Steve, do you want a rebuttals portion? Because it seems like you're doing a rebuttal instead of a cross examination. Do you want, if you want, we can add the rebuttal portion and then transition, take maybe 10 minutes off of the cross examination portion, or 20 minutes off the cross examination portion, and just give you and Andrew 10 minutes of rebuttal time. Would that sound better?
Yeah, if you want to do that, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, I think I'll do that because it seems like you're rebutting what he's saying. So I'll give, after you're done, I'll give Andrew the 10 minutes to rebut as well.
Yeah, okay, yeah, and
no?
then I'm done. That's all I have.
That's all you have? Okay.
Oh, okay. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
Andrew,
Yeah,
go
like
for it.
I was going to say, Marlon, like you interrupted the man. Okay, so you want me to do
Yeah, you got it.
So let me just put my clock back on for 10-minute rebuttal. Okay. All right. So what you've seen so far in this is Stephen has yet to actually address the main issue of this debate. Is secular humanism superior to Christianity? He has yet to even attempt to do this. Now, can I prove the laws of logic are not products of the human brain, not something that was discovered by people? Yes, I can very easily. You could take the second law of logic, which is a law of non-contradiction. You can't have A and not A in the same time in the same way. Let's apply it to before there were any human beings. Before there was even a universe, could the universe have existed and not existed at the same time and the same way? Well, you either have to say yes, and therefore you have contradictions, and I can say whatever I want, and it doesn't matter because in your world, contradictions exist. Or you have to say that no, the laws of logic apply and therefore are not the product of a human brain. Can we measure a rock objectively rolling? No. You cannot do that in believing in subjectivity. When you believe that it's just chemical reactions, if you're going, the only way to measure the rock rolling is to have the same standard. If he's using the metric system and I'm using a system of, in America, guess what? We have a problem, right? So you're not going to get the same measurement because you're using a different standard. So if someone makes up a standard, back years ago, they used to call a foot, the length of the king's foot, or, a cubit was the length of the forearm. That's not an accurate way to measure. So they needed an objective way to get consistent things. So it does have to be objective. He says concepts are something that he thinks could be in the brain. The issue there is the fact that I'm saying words, he's understanding them, he's saying words, I understand them. That is something that we're both understanding the concepts. So that's an immaterial thing. However, when he talks about he can imagine a world where these things could exist. That's true. You could imagine a world like that. It's called a fairy tale. And that's what the world that I believe people that are human secularists live in. They live in a fairy tale. They believe in a magical bang that exploded from nothing, but that nothing was actually something, exploded into everything. It defies all the laws that we actually have, and that's why they have to say that nothing was actually something. There's now been mathematically shown that it wasn't a singularity, but multiple singularities. So they keep having to adjust their definitions for things. But the reality is that he has not shown yet that secular humanism in any way whatsoever is superior to Christianity.
Okay. My rebuttal?
Yeah, I guess now is a cross-examination portion, so we can go ahead and ask each other questions. That'd be real cool. So, yeah, Steve, you got it. Go ahead and cross-examine Andrew. for 10 minutes.
Okay, sure. Let me just run down these responses real quick. So I don't know if I would ever try to justify, or I don't think I would need to justify secular humanism directly. Rather, what I would appeal to is the idea that if I want to make a good decision about any given environment, it's typically better to collect and analyze the information as best as possible. So using whatever objective standards that I can use to measure like a particular thing. So if I have somebody that wants to use a fantastical measurement system or something that is drawing on concepts that nobody can verify, it seems like it would be very hard to make an accurate decision on how to deal with any given problem. So for example, let's say we have a sick person and one person wants to weigh, say, medical data, biological sciences, sociological data, income to figure out what's the best outcome for this person. And another person wants to draw on immaterial concepts like, well, if we say prayers for them, they'll feel better. It's very hard to make for that other person to make an accurate assessment of what is the best path forward for the other person, for the actual sick person. So I usually appeal to things that are somewhat like physically verifiable in order to say, well, these are the best decisions we can make. So when we talk about, or if I were to talk about secular humanism versus Christianity, I would say, well, any type of secular ideology is going to be superior to a Christian one because anytime we can gather and analyze information in a more objective manner, it's going to be superior to somebody that's kind of inventing a story in order to give us prescriptive statements that may or may not be good, but we can't really hold these to any type of objective standard because they're coming from, like old religious texts or old religious law. A couple of the other random things, talking about how could there have been non-contradiction before a universe. I can't fathom what anything would have been like before the universe. I would challenge you to be able to do the same. I'm going to concede to say that there's a boundary to what we can know right now as people. I don't even know if humans, given all a perfect information set of the universe, could know what the universe was like before the universe. But of course, I would pose the same challenge to you. What does the world look like before God? Or any question like that, we could retreat back to the ground that, well, maybe God is eternal. Like I said, well, maybe the universe is eternal, and we're kind of in the same boat again. So we mentioned, like, can we measure a rock rolling objectively? And we said, well, of course not. What if people have two different systems of measurement? And then we give an example of two different systems of measurement. But the problem is that even though that example is true, we still do use these measurements to compare things. Some people have metric systems, some people use imperial systems, but somehow we still have found ways to reconcile our measurements so that we all kind of measure the same thing. So it seemed by virtue of that own example that, well, yeah, we can obviously agree on common measurement systems. We do it all the time. Concepts. So apparently we're having, I'm not 100% sure what immaterial means. And when we're talking about, like, we're saying words of understanding concepts, therefore things are immaterial. So my physicalist or materialist definition is that every phenomenon that arises can be traced to, like, physical causes. So when I talk, some portion of my brain is being activated that is accessing concepts that I'm using to move my throat, my tongue, and everything to vocalize a sound. You hear that sound, and then you compare it to things that you understand in your own brain because you've been introduced to these concepts, like language or other types of concepts, and then you are able to, like, have these ideas in your mind. Nothing about the process of us communicating requires any sort of immaterial world or immaterial knowledge or anything of the sort. So I don't know where immaterial things have to come in for communication. And then the final point is we obviously point to the magical Big Bang that explains everything. I mean, obviously science doesn't have an answer. Maybe it never will for how the universe started. But I mean, it's just as much a fairy tale to say that God created everything as it is to say there is a Big Bang that created everything in the beginning of the universe. I mean, I don't think one of these things is like super logical, like God made everything, and the other one is super fantastical, like there's a Big Bang. And then, like, the final, assertion, well, you have to keep adjusting things. I mean, that's how I would expect any good, like, investigatory tool to work. You would want to keep adjusting your theories based on, newly collected information. It's much better to do that than to have to pretend that things are never wrong, like with a religious text, or to slowly say more and more things, well, that was symbolic, well, that was symbolic, well, that was symbolic, because you later find out in a God of the Gaps fashion that a lot of the old predictions or a lot of the things that some religious texts said, came to not be true or can't be validated in any way with the tools we have today.
Okay.
All right.
All right, my turn for cross?
Go ahead, Andrew. You got 10 minutes for cross-examination.
Okay, so the way with cross-examination works is you ask me a question, I answer it, I ask you questions, you answer it. So,
okay,
do you, based on what you had said, do Christians use facts and observation?
Yeah, I would imagine everybody purports to, yeah.
Okay, so Therefore, it's not based on story and from an old book, like you said.
Well, no, those would be the facts and observations, right?
Okay, because it seems like the basis of your argument is that secular humanism is better, as you had stated, because it's better to use facts and observation versus story. So the only way it could be better or superior is if that was true. If that's not true, then you still have yet to show how it's superior. So how specifically is secular humanism superior to Christianity?
So if you ask, do Christians use facts and observations? I would say, well, they purport to use facts and observations, but their facts and observations tend to be non-verifiable supernatural truths or things from like religious texts. So I would say everybody uses facts and observations, but what I would challenge Christians on is the veracity of the facts and observations they use. So I would say that's like the problem with religious people, is the facts and observations they lean into tend to be supernatural, unverifiable, immaterial things. So so the superiority of like secularism would come from the fact that ideally we don't rely on like supernatural truths, like things that we actually can understand.
But you just spent a good amount of time explaining that we don't know the beginning of the universe. We don't know how that is. So you are in a position that you have a science of the gaps. You shove science in to say that science may have an answer, but you have just admitted that you have unverifiable conclusions that you make. So you're saying it's, again, I'm going to ask the same question again till we get an answer. You keep showing that there's no basis in which secular humanism is superior to Christianity, because the argument you just made earlier was that secular humanism is superior because Christianity has unverifiable things. You've admitted that your worldview, secular humanism, has unverifiable facts. Okay, so now we're on the same boat. How is it superior?
Yeah, so I totally reject this. So you're saying that my problem is I say, well, Christianity has unverifiable claims, and then you turn it around and you say, well, you can't tell me how the universe started. I don't think appealing to the hardest questions of all of science, like what may be literally the hardest question to ever answer, and then saying, since you don't have an answer to that, all of your claims are just as unverifiable as mine. I don't think the beginning of the universe is a question that we need to answer before we begin either an investigation locally of our own world, or trying to answer questions about how we should act in the world. I don't think I needed an answer to how did the universe begin to know whether or not I say should murder somebody or should not murder somebody, or maybe to figure out what is the most effective medicine to heal somebody. My problem with Christians isn't that they have some unverifiable claims. It's that they use these unverifiable claims to make judgments about the world on a daily basis. Scientists don't go around saying your car is going to start and turn on because the Big Bang happened, whereas Christians will say you ought to do this and this and this because this is what God is actively saying. I don't claim to have all of the answers of the universe, the Christian does, but I also don't claim that you need all the answers of the universe to make any type of prescriptive claim or to understand any of the world around us.
Okay, I don't know if at any point Stephen's going to actually answer questions that are asked or just do rabbit trails, so we'll try this again. See, the question, Stephen, is not what happens with, because the appeals to science are the same appeals Christians make. Okay, the issue is the secular humanism that you're arguing for is just chemical reactions. That is directly based on, if you want to say, the creation of the universe. Therefore, you do have to answer that because you're saying it's just a product of evolution. So if it's just all from just random chance and it's all chemical reactions and all the studies show that that's not better, because when people believe what you're espousing, they're more likely to cheat, to steal, and to be immoral. That doesn't sound superior to me or to any objective standard. So you said better was the standard of superior. I'm trying to find out how secular humanism, in what measurable way we can say secular humanism is superior to Christianity. I'm still waiting. So I'll ask it again. How is secular humanism superior to Christianity?
Yeah, so I'll restate this. I guess if any part of this doesn't make sense, I can explain in particular. But I would say that secularism is superior to Christianity because I don't rely on unverifiable, unmeasurable statements to evaluate the world. I'm never going to tell somebody that a certain level of prayer is going to cure somebody over like a medical product of some kind. I'm never going to tell somebody that they ought to do something because of some invisible guy or whatever that said something a long time ago. I don't have to make any of these appeals because I don't rely on immaterial, supernatural concepts to do it. That's the better part, I would say. Whether or not we can show that certain studies today show there are people have worse outcomes when they make particular decisions related to being told whether or not they have free will. Well, that doesn't really say whether or not free will is better or not better. That just says that people's ideas right now of free will are very much tied into how they view themselves. I mean, we could very easily change that. I'm sure that if you were to ask a philosophy student that already didn't believe in free will these same questions, they'd probably give a better answer than a normal person who's constantly told they have free will. That's not surprising to me at all. I mean, I will make appeals to science because I like that different people can come together and measure the different claims that are being made. You can't really do that same thing with religion. If I have 3 different scientists in a room all telling me something different, we can all go into a laboratory and test the claims as used right. If you have 3 different religious people telling us what's different, there's no way at the end of the day to settle any of these disputes. And so if we were trying to figure out what's better, secularism versus Christianity, I would argue that the 3 scientists that can go into a room and come out with one conclusion is always going to be better for humanity than the 3 religious people that are just going to argue and fight among one another that will never give us like a conclusion that all 3 agree on.
Okay, so you have a great straw man argument because you've yet to explain what Christianity properly is. You continue to go through an argument that's not real. I mean, this is a red herring. So the fact is that religion uses science. I can sit here and I can talk about facts and science because you were claiming that the universe could be eternal. No, it can't. The first law of thermodynamics proves that. So the dilemma you have is, where did the universe come from? There's only 3 possibilities. Did the universe, was it eternal, violating the first law of thermodynamics? Did it create itself, violating the second law of logic, because it would first have to exist to be able to create itself? Therefore, someone or something must have created it. Those are the only 3 options. Which of those 3 would you hold to?
I mean, I don't think I need to demonstrate whether or not the laws of logic or thermodynamics exist before the state of the universe. I don't think I'm capable of ever even comprehending or even imagining what a universe would look like outside of the existence of the universe. I can't fathom that. So I mean, I wouldn't appeal to any of those 3 things that the universe, violates non-contradiction or something. I can't have information about what happened before the existence of the universe.
So you can't verify that.
With our current technology, it doesn't seem to be the case. I don't know if we'd ever be able to verify anything related to the initial state of the universe. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, I verified it within the question. Okay, you can verify these things like the first, second, third law in thermodynamics prove some of these things out. So we do have some verification with these things. We can tell that matter did have a beginning. So Einstein showed that. So there are ways to verify it. You, however, seem to have a worldview that isn't verifiable, and then you criticize Christianity saying it is the one that's not verifiable. So I'm still trying to figure out where we, let me ask these questions in 2 minutes I have left. By what authority can you argue that one chemical reaction is superior to another chemical reaction?
So if we're talking about what is superior to another thing, we're kind of making normative claims where we're comparing one state to another. So the appeal that I would broadly make is that humans seem to prefer some states to other states, and it seems like it's easiest if all of us kind of get together and push towards the states that most of us agree are preferable to the non-preferable ones. So for instance, if we can imagine a world where everybody is starving and a world where everybody has food, it seems like biologically most of us have a preference towards the second world, and it seems like we don't violate, other people's, right to life or existence, whatever, when we move towards that second world. So that seems to be what we all kind of agree to move towards. I don't believe there is an objective standard by which we can measure good or bad. I don't believe there's an objective way to say like this is morally virtuous versus this is like a moral wrong. So I wouldn't go as far as to say that there's like an authority that I can appeal to for some sort of moral statement. I would just descriptively state that like, well, people tend to move towards areas that make them feel better than other areas.
Okay. Well, there's only 19 seconds left, so I'll save the questions.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Now, Steve, it's your turn for a 10-minute examination. 10-minute
Yeah, I gotcha. Wait, did my camera just turn? Oh, there you go. Sorry.
Yeah, your camera just got. There you go.
So I guess like if you're religious, you must see God, in the world today doing something, I imagine, unless you believe in the I guess in the clock starter or whatever, where he started the universe and just kind of stepped away. Where do you see God in the world today?
Everywhere. He holds it all together.
So if I were to ask you to point to a thing where I was like, what part of this, what fact of the world shows like this is God? So for instance, we would talk about childbirth, right? We know how two people can have sex. We know how all of the stuff combines. We know how the process works inside the woman, and then we know how the baby's delivered. I can show this whole process using scientific inventions. Where is God at? I guess I'm trying to find him like in any of these areas. Where do I look?
Well, okay. First off, you keep making this appeal to science, which you cannot do without God first existing, because you need an ability to have laws of logic, knowledge, truth, these things that are immaterial that you want to avoid answering. So the fact is where is God? Well, he's in that whole process, because if you actually understood the birth process, you'd realize that it goes against the way that the egg is going to go down the tube to get to where it can be fertilized by a sperm. There's little hairs that go opposite direction, and yet the egg still travels that way. How does that happen? That shouldn't happen, but it does happen. So it couldn't happen evolutionarily, but it does. It happens. So what we end up seeing is there's a lot of things that just couldn't be without God. So where's God in it? Well, the whole concept, the whole idea that we can sit there and realize that these two chemicals suddenly get an immaterial part of them. That immaterial part of you that is you, that part that can reason, that ability to reason, that ability to understand concepts. This is part of an immaterial part of you that is at conception. So if specifically you want to know with birth, I don't know what that has to do with secular humanism being superior to Christianity.
Okay, so it seems like we've basically ceded the entire ground that God doesn't exist in any observable way in the universe, and we want to say that, well, God is actually a precondition for logic and reason. So, we'll move out of the physical world, because we've totally conceded that. And I'll ask, how do you need God for logic? What is the process like for that argument?
Okay, so one typical debate topic or debate style is to listen to what someone says, make a conclusion about what they said that's completely opposite, and then say, well, we'll move on. I won't let you do that. Okay, you asked for a specific way in a specific case of birth. And I gave you a specific way scientifically that it can't work evolutionarily. Okay?
The childbirth thing, I'm familiar with that. That's just not true. So I don't know how to respond to that. I can't show us a woman. I mean, we can all go and watch a video, or we can read in a book how childbirth. There is no hairs that prevent the fertilized egg or fetus or whatever from moving through a woman for childbirth. I don't know how to respond to that.
Okay, well, so you're just ignorant on the subject. That's fine, but don't then conclude that I haven't said that. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I acknowledge that you said that. I mean, I guess I could leave it up to the audience to read if we understand how childbirth exists.
There's plenty of ways we can observe gods in the universe. The fact that there is a universe is enough. The fact that you have an ability to reason, the fact that you understand concepts, all these immaterial things are not possible. And I know you want to move on from that, but the one thing I'm not seeing how any of this makes secular humanism superior in any objective way to Christianity. All you have is a bunch of claims.
Yeah, so my initial claim is weird that you say
wrong for having claims.
I'm sorry, were you finished?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, if I talk when you're talking, it'll like cut you out. So I'm trying not to talk over you if you're responding. Sorry, that's why I asked. Okay, so I've said multiple times that I think that secularism is superior to Christianity because my claims are verifiable. So I think I can make better observations and judgments about the world, which would allow me to make better prescriptive claims about what to do with the state of the world. So it seems like you just moved to the point that you said I was strawmanning you on, which is where even if I were to concede that childbirth is somehow not possible without God, which I wouldn't concede that, but if I did, that still doesn't show God, unless you're literally saying that God is divinely moving, fetuses through women in order to have childbirth against the own bodies that God also supposedly designed. I don't follow that argument at all. But the argument I'm more interested in, I don't know if we'll go back to the Schellenberg thing. The argument I'm more interested in is this idea that you need God for things like logic. I really want to know how you can justify that claim. How can you possibly say that we require a God for like laws of logic to exist?
Why does it say require God?
Yeah.
Because immaterial things need an immaterial source. Chemical reactions, material things cannot produce immaterial. That's just a law of nature. So if you have anything that's immaterial, as I've kept saying, you keep saying that I'm not providing that example. And for folks who may be watching, notice what he's doing here over and over again. He continues to appeal to say that Christians don't do science somehow. We use the same exact science. There's very little science that's based in whether God exists or not exists. So I've never needed to use in any of the work that I've done that God exists to program computers or develop some of the things I've developed. No, it's not. It's fictitious. So, because every time you have an immaterial entity, it requires an immaterial source. That's why that's something you'd have to be able to argue. Now, you argue we're just chemical reactions, then you have to be able to answer these things. But you have plenty of things you can't verify, as you've said, and yet you keep saying that it's us Christians that can't verify anything. That's not being accurate to what Christianity holds to. And the one thing that hasn't been done throughout this is any kind of even definition, other than I gave in the beginning of, which was your definitions, to what secular humanism is and Christianity is. You've yet to describe Christianity itself. You've made claims of Christians. That's not Christianity. You've yet to make a support. So,
we can go over the definitions of secular humanism again or Christianity again. I don't know how that's relevant to the conversation. You read them off at the start. I don't know if I could repeat them back to you if that's what you want. But in terms of, I guess the frustrating thing is that when you go to church, so I went to church every Sunday. I was a Catholic. When Christians talk about all the things that God is involved in, very rarely do you go and listen to a sermon about how, well, God is here so that we can have a priori truths about logic. If we're going to back God up into this very weird, esoteric niche world where God is like the engine that powers like these fundamental, laws of logic of the universe, then you're talking about him in such an immaterial fashion that it's completely and totally impossible for you to ever verify it. Because I can ask you again, because you actually haven't answered this, how do we get laws of logic from God? And how can you even know that you're getting those laws of logic from God? If you need him just to even begin to form a thought, how can you know what he is if he's required to even think? How do you even get that information?
Sure. The laws of logic come from the nature of God. That's where they come from. How do we know them? Because he's revealed them. He's revealed them in the heart of every single human being knows the existence of God. He has written this. So we have the fact that he's put laws in our heart. We have a conscience. We know right from wrong. That's the evidence. You can look at nature. God's created the stars and everything else, so we could be in awe of how great he is. So we can look at his own creation, and then we have special revelation, which he's revealed in writing, so we can have something objective that we can look to. Now, if we're just chemical reactions, then there is no objective reality. So he's given us something objective. You said no religions can compare themselves, can come to one true one. In my close, I will give you how to prove objectively what is the one true religion.
Okay, so then I would ask you simply, how do you know that the laws of logic come from God? You said that he reveals them to you. How do you know this revelation is real and you're not being tricked by, say, a demon of some sort?
Well, I would say, the answer would be very simple. The creator who created the universe created it with laws of logic in place. Therefore, it comes from him. To believe that we have this organized laws in place and it came about by chance, by randomness, by chaos, that takes more faith to believe. You say you believe in things that are facts and objective and that can be researched. show me how chaos creates organization, because that's essential to your view. You know, you'll probably appeal and say, well, it's not, I can't verify that. Well, then stop saying that we Christians are inferior because we have things we can't verify, because there's plenty of things you can't verify either. So again, you know, I'm just not seeing how that's making Christianity inferior in any way to secular humanism.
All right, that's 10 minutes. All right, we're now going to closing statements. Steve, you have the first closing statement.
Yeah, so I mean, my close, I mean, like, this is kind of like rock bottom for the presuppositionalist argument. You ask them, okay, well, how do you know that God is giving you divine revelation and someone's not tricking you? And they'll just circularly say, well, God created the universe, so I know it's right. And you can keep asking that. You're never going to get a response, because the fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, nobody can justify, like, foundational truths of our existence. So, for instance, like, how can I know that law of identity is real, or causality is real, or non-contradiction is real? Well, it just seems like things we kind of know a priori as humans. Nobody is able to justify this. No philosopher ever has. No religious person ever has. And if you ask the religious person to, it always becomes circular at the end, like it did when I asked last. I'll continue to say that secular humanism, ways to measure things and verify things in the world scientifically, is always going to be superior than relying on old and outdated religious texts for any kind of scientific truth or any truth at all. And those are that's my closing on that.
All right, Andrew, now you have 10 minutes or so for closing statements.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank Stephen and Marlo for having this debate, for Stephen for coming on and doing this, and for Marlo for just hosting this. Appreciate that. In closing, I would like to say that Stephen mentioned that I did not answer how the laws of logic come from God. I think I did. When I stated he's the creator, if he created a world, a universe with the laws of logic, then it comes from him. That's part of being a creator. To say that it comes from nothing, the laws of logic come from nothing, but they work perfectly. By the way, he keeps appealing to ancient texts. Well, the fact is that none of the science, Christians do science. So that doesn't prove that secular humanism is superior. Christians do science all the time. The fact is that what we end up seeing in science is that it has to keep changing its own views on things it held absolutely. I bet Stephen is not, because he's not old enough to remember when there was time that people taught about ether. Ether was this thought that there was something, invisible force between all objects. And yet, nope, there was no ether. Einstein proved that. So we change in science, and that's fine. But you know what? None of that science has ever disproven the Bible. Now, we do have people who have biases when it comes to science, and they put that bias in, and so they will restrict certain things. We just had a case recently where a professor found soft tissue in a horn of a triceratops. And what we find, he got fired for saying, well, this can't happen unless the earth is young. So whenever we have someone that is believing in anything other than what is allowed to be taught in science, in other words, they will shut down anything that disagrees with their conclusion. That's called confirmation bias. And then they force that upon everyone to say, you must accept this, because that's what the argument is, and to say that anyone that's religious doesn't follow science. No, we do follow science. We use the same science anyone else can use. There were plenty of Christians that got the men to the moon, as well as there were non-Christians. And none of that affected any of their religious system. In fact, most of the people that started doing science were all Christians. So the whole argument he's made that secular humanism is superior to Christianity has been based on, well, strawman arguments of Christianity, based on conclusions that he didn't affirm or couldn't verify. The fact is he said that he does everything based on facts and objective, but like I said in the beginning, he provided no objective standard whatsoever to be able to judge whether these two are comparable, even, because we are just chemical reactions in his worldview. He's made that clear. Now, he asked, how can you know which religion is true? There is an objective way to do that, to examine every world religion. I have studied for 14 years of my life other world religions. I've compared them, and I can say that there is an objective way to look at all the world religions and see which one is right versus which ones are not. Which ones are man-made versus divine. Very simply. One of the things we know about human nature is humans will always praise their own works. You'll see that in any time you have a king. You have a king, he goes to war. If he loses the war, he's going to praise the battles that he won during the war. Why? Because that's what humans do. So all you have to do is look at any single religion that adds any human effort to the core part of what it means to be in a religion, getting right with God, and you have a man-made religion. So when you look at that simple, objective way, you can compare every single religion. What do you see? Every single religion except for one, biblical Christianity, says man does something. If it's Catholicism, as Stephen grew up, that would be a man-made religion because they believe in works plus faith. If you want to believe in Islam, you do one good work counts for 10 bad works. If you want to do Second Temple Judaism, which is not biblical Judaism of the Old Testament, they would say you get right with God by doing Torah, by obeying the law. So every system has this idea of works. If you want to look at Buddhism or Hinduism, they have the idea that when you do enough good, you'll eventually get to nirvana. You'll come back in a better life, and if you do bad, you go to a worse life. But again, based on works. The reality is what we see in the one true religion, which God revealed in Scripture, is the fact that all of us, Stephen and myself, Marlo, and all of you watching included, all of us break God's law. We have a conscience. We know we lie, we steal, we do things that break his law. That's why we have that guilty feeling. So that not only can we look at the universe and know God exists, but we can look at our conscience and know we've broken his law. But he made a way of escape, that God himself did all the work. God himself became a man, came to earth, and he paid the full punishment of sin upon himself on that cross. When he was on that cross, he took the full weight of sin, the punishment that I deserve, and he paid it himself. Being an eternal being, this is why it's important that he's God. This is another unique thing of Christianity. Not only is it the only one where God does everything, but it is the only one that's not based on a system of morality. Another objective way you can compare is that every man-made system is a system of morality. Christianity is not. Christianity is not based on teachings. It's based on a person. And that person being Jesus Christ. Why is it unique with him? Because he is truly God and truly man. Being truly man, he can pay the fine of other people as long as he's never broken the law. Being truly God means that he is eternal, and being an eternal being, he can pay the punishment for not only all time, but multiple people because of his nature being an eternal being. So here's 2 of 3 objective ways you can compare which religion is true. I'll get to the third in a moment. But the thing is that what you end up seeing is that Christ on that cross became sin, paid the price of sin that we could be set free. The fact is that he paid it, but if we don't receive that gift, that payment's not for us. Because people's pride think they can do it their own way. A third objective way is that every religion will say that God is both just and merciful. Islam will refer to Allah most merciful, but you cannot have justice and mercy in the same way in the same time. They're mutually exclusive. If Stephen was to slap me and the law says, and I don't think he would, but if he was to slap me and the law says that I must slap him back, I can do one of 2 things. I can slap him, that would be just. I can show mercy and not slap him, but I cannot do both. If I tap him lightly, that's not grace, that's not mercy, and it's not just. So you get neither. Only within Christianity do you have justice and mercy, because Christ himself, being a man, was able to go to that cross and take the full weight of sin upon himself. And therefore, he took all that sin, so it was fully paid. Therefore, the justice was paid. Now he can offer mercy. And so what Christianity actually teaches has nothing to do with what we've actually been talking about, unfortunately, today. It is about the fact that we can be reconciled to God, that we could be free from guilt of sin and not have to turn to drugs and alcohol and all these different things, or turn to fairy tales like believing in frogs that could become princes over millions of years. The reality is that we will all be accountable to God. It's appointed unto man once to die and then a judgment, and we're going to face God one day. And how will you stand? Will you stand before God and be seen as righteous in his eyes because you have accepted his free gift, or will you stand before God and have to pay for the consequences of your sins? That's the way to know one true religion. Now, in the conclusion of this debate, I would have to say that in nowhere did we see established that secular humanism is objectively superior to Christianity other than in the mind of my opponent. He made claims about Christianity that are untrue. He didn't give anything that shows that Christianity itself is the basis of somehow this thinking that he claims Christianity has. He didn't substantiate any of it, and he couldn't verify any of the things that are essential to his belief system. So I would say that when he says everything is just a chemical reaction, and then he wants to appeal to an objective source, that's no longer a chemical reaction. And I would argue that in his opening statement, when he said he appeals to objective facts and things he could objectively observe, well, he can't do that if it's just chemical reactions. There's only one thing that we could look at as scientific evidence of the universe. You need someone to create something and someone to observe it and someone to record it. That's what we have in the Bible. God created the universe. He observed it. He recorded it. It follows a scientific method. He will destroy it and recreate it one day. So what we end up seeing is the only scientific method you have for the creation of the universe is found in Genesis chapter 1.
All right. Thank you, too. I have one question. One question for you, too. As the subject matter of, is Christianity superior, or secular humanism superior to Christianity? First, I guess Stephen can answer this question first. How would you say that secular humanism is better than Christianity when we take in consideration all the wars and everything, the amount of death that we've seen within the last, 100 years or so, from the atheist perspective, when you have regimes that are headed by atheistic philosophy? How would you handle that one, Stephen?
Wars it would depend on the particular war. Wars are very complicated geopolitical issues that can be a convergence of a lot of different types of things. Economic despair can cause it, social woes. There's so many different types of things that can cause wars. I wouldn't attribute that. I wouldn't even attribute religious wars to religion. I wouldn't say that ISIS is the product of Muslims, or that I don't even know if I would go as far as to say the Crusades were religious wars. There are so many things that come together to make conflict happen between people. I think to ascribe it wholly onto either somebody's religion or lack thereof is an incredibly simplistic and naive way of analyzing very complicated human behavior.
Okay, Andrew.
Well, I'd say amen to Stephen, and I think more folks from secular humanism perspective should listen to what he just said there, because the reality is that wars are complex. People try to make this case that he brought up the Crusades. I mean, even though it was called a holy war, there was so much political. I mean, the Catholic Church was doing a whole lot to gain power by sending the nobles. So there's a lot in play in religious wars. I think there are times where some wars are over specific things, and they're clarified that way. I think our Civil War was, even that you could say, okay, was it over slavery? Man, it was also over taxes. So it's not always so clear with those things. So I would say that, when we end up seeing some of the things, I mean, and maybe your question's coming in because a lot of, and I wasn't sure I actually had this in my cross, because I thought this may be where Stephen was going to go. There are a lot of people that try to say that religious wars have killed, that more people have been killed in the name of religion than in atheism. That it wouldn't actually be true by if you keep an apples to apples description, right? If we're going to say, okay, we look at the wars done by Muslims and Jews and Catholics and all these others, you could add them all up, but when you start putting Mao, Stalin, Lenin and their views, well, all of a sudden there's more in the last 100 years than all the religions combined. But I'll agree with Stephen that it's not really a fair way to make the analysis. If Stephen made that argument and made that case, then yeah, it would be fair to say, okay, let's look at Mao, Stalin, Lenin, because then it's an apples to apples.
Okay. What would you guys say, Andrea, I'd like you to go first on this one. What would you guys say to, I guess, from the Christian position of the relief that we've seen in America, throughout the country, throughout the world, as far as humanitarian reliefs, of helping humans throughout the world. What would you say, Andrew? Do you say that the Christian position is more proliferated there, is stronger there, or would you say the secular position would be more stronger?
Well, I mean, it's been shown that Christian organizations are usually the first ones into places where there's natural disasters. Now, granted, we go in. Christians, let's be really clear. Christians are going in because there's tragedy. They care for their fellow man, and they care where they spend eternity. So, well, for a lot of times, we're going in for a gospel opportunity as well as the humanitarian aid. But what we do end up seeing that most of the Red Cross, Salvation Army, all of these were originally Christian-based organizations. Even though they've gotten bigger and gotten away from some of that, they were still Christian-based. So, but again, when comparing that, I would look at that and say it's the same thing as with my opening. When people don't believe that they're accountable, when they don't believe they have a free will, when they believe they're just chemical reactions and products of chance, they don't care as much about their fellow man. So they're not going to go in to those areas. And I think that, I think there will be a time when secular humanism is going to be going against not Christianity, but Islam. And I'm sorry, but secular humanism, once they get rid of all the Christians and Islam starts taking over, the Muslims will die for what they believe in, and secular humanists won't. Because secular humanism is about selfishness. By definition, it's about what's good for me and what I believe. And so therefore, they're not going to be caring about their fellow man if they actually believe it. Fortunately, the majority of people that profess to be secular humanists don't live that way. And I'm glad for that. Why? Because they have a God-given conscience. And so they don't live out their belief system, which is good.
Okay, Steve, you have any comments on that?
I mean, there's a lot to deal with, but I mean, you can still be selfish and still, help other people. That doesn't require some godly thing to do it. So, for instance, I have a son, and my love for him is entirely selfish. I love my son. I would do anything for him, not because I need God to make me not selfish, but because he's my son and I love him, and I would do anything for him. And it makes me, just by virtue of that alone, that makes me happy to do it. So, I could still be selfishly motivated to do things for other people. A form of self-interested altruism almost, but.
Okay. One last question for you guys. What about the situation where we see Christians misbehaving? Okay, we see from a macro standpoint, we see humanitarian efforts from Christian organizations. But from a micro standpoint, we always hear about those who are influenced, or quote unquote, we would say are supposed to be influenced by the Christian position. We hear allegations of child molestation. We hear allegations of stealing from the church. Things like that. How do we handle that, Andrew?
Okay, well, the issue, the way to handle that is to realize that the majority of people who claim they're Christian are not. Now, this is not the true Scotsman fallacy. Okay, true Scotsman fallacy is a case where you have no way of measuring something. We do have a way of measuring what a Christian is. As really in the way Stephen did it, when I asked him for a definition, collection of beliefs that are inspired by the Bible. So the Bible tells us what a Christian would be and what a Christian would not be. And so the Bible says that a Christian is someone who's going to believe that Christ alone died for them and that they receive that gift of eternal life. It's, do you see people that grew up in a Christian home and are false converts or hypocrites? Well, the Bible is really, really clear that there will be hypocrites. Actually, most of the parables, if you look in the New Testament, people would like to talk about the fact that Jesus spoke more about hell than heaven, and they spoke more about money than heaven and hell combined. Well, Christ spoke about hypocrisy more than heaven, hell, and money combined. Why? Because it's going to be prevalent. So he said, many, not few, many will come to me in that day, meaning referring to the day of judgment. Many will come to me in that day and say, Lord, I've done many great things in your name. I've healed the sick. I've done miracles. I've done all these works. And he says, and I will declare to you, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. So it's really clear. You see this, the parable of the four seeds on the different soils, right? And they're in the different soils. One's a believer, one's not a believer, two are false converts. Two of them, one grows up quickly. They look like they're a believer. Then they die out. The other, it takes more time, but eventually the world chokes them out. So basically we see that the scriptures where there will be hypocrites. There will be people that are pretending to be Christians, but they never were. And so they will plague the church. The reality is, unfortunately, we have big issues in our culture today with sexual predators. And the one place that sexual predators prey on the most is churches. They fake it. Why? Because people in churches are typically going to be more trusting. They know that, and that's why they will appeal to that. And you can see that they're going to, I guess this is back to the other question more than this one, but I always find it interesting that homeless always have signs that say, God bless you. They always want to appeal to the Christian. Why? Because they know the Christian is going to be more caring in that way. So the reality is that predators go to church. It's the reason churches need to be taking our seminar that we have for identifying sexual predators. A seminar we do at Striving Fraternity. We have one of Georgia's leading experts as our speakers. And so because the reality is we know it's a preying ground for them. They will pretend to be a Christian. I knew a guy in my church for 3 years pretended to be a Christian just because he wanted to date a woman. Once it was announced that she was married, he went back to the bar, went back to where he used to work. And he said, I was faking it just because I wanted to get a girl. So yeah, there are people who pretend. There's people who are self-deceived. And yes, some even get into positions of leadership. I know many pastors who got saved in the pastorate. So that it's clear that they weren't saved before. They saved meaning they were converted into Christianity. You're not born a Christian. So when we see bad things happen within the church, it's going to be one of two things. It's either false converts, people who are hypocrites and faking it, or you have people that are exactly what is the entrance into a church. The entrance into church is saying, I'm a sinner. So if people act like a sinner, that happens. Really, the hypocrites are those that are in the world saying they're a good person, and yet they sin.
Okay.
So,
Steve, go ahead. You finish, Andrew?
Yeah.
Okay, Steve, you have any comments there?
The original question was, what do you have to say about Christians that act badly, basically?
Yeah, Christians act badly, and how we argue for secular humanism better than Christianity. A lot of the argument is, well, people within the body or within the church are misbehaving. You know what I mean? So.
That's a dumb argument. I mean, as was brought up, you could have people that are Christians that are not really Christians. I mean, geez, I went to so much Catholic schooling, I could give really well prepared answers to this as well. Just because somebody sins doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad person. Sin can be a reflection of the original sin we all inherit at birth. God gives us the path of the way to act in a righteous manner. We don't always choose to do that. That doesn't make us worse people. God can still save us. We can still recognize the wrong of our sins. There's a million different ways to address that topic. When advocating for secular humanism over religious beliefs, this is kind of sort of related, I guess. The biggest thing that a lot of secular humanists miss is that religion does provide a lot of structure that is incredibly beneficial that for some reason secular people totally miss out on. So for instance, there's a lot of rituals associated with religion. So that might be going to a particular place and, talking about life and reaffirming, everybody's existence every Sunday or Saturday, depending on which flavor of religion you follow. That's an important ritual that a lot of religious people have. Maybe there should be something like that for secular people. Acts of charity and community building that a lot of religious organizations take part in. Different communities related to schools. I went to private religious schools. I mean, that's something that can be really valuable. Outside of like the supernatural claims that religions make, there's a lot of structural value there that secular people could probably borrow from instead of ceding it all of it to religious territory. And I'd say that secular people could focus on that going forward, like to give somebody something to replace the rituals that they lose once they leave any type of religious establishment, to give them something else to kind of latch onto.
Okay, and this is my final question. What would be the one thing what would be the one thing, Andrew, that would separate Christianity from secular humanism? What would be the one outstanding aspect that says that this is why Christianity is superior to secular humanism?
Well, I would say it's superior because it's true, ultimately. But it's also superior in the definitions that Stephen had given, in the fact that we see in the accounts of morality, in every account, people behave better when they know they're accountable to God. And so, when you compare to how we treat our fellow man, it's superior. When you're going to compare to being able to account for how we do science, it's superior. When we look at the science, I'm going to say it's superior. But Christianity is not about science, which is what this kind of debate was more seeming like it was about, was kind of how Christianity almost versus science and not secular humanism. But so I would argue if someone lives out secular humanism, every study shows it's not going to be superior. And in fact, the article I quoted, their conclusion is we have to pretend basically like there's a God, like we have free will, like Christianity is there, because otherwise people don't behave well.
Okay, Steve, what you got?
So the original question is, what is like the one way you can say your thing is superior?
What is the one thing that you think of that makes secular humanism superior to Christianity?
Well, I mean, I would give obviously the same answer he gave. I would say that mine is true. I think that there are more verifiable claims that mine makes without requiring any kind of supernatural beliefs or any kind of like superstition. I don't think that any of the investigations that we do today in medicine or biology or whatever require any type of supernatural or superstitious belief, and I would prefer to keep it that way. It's really scary when people start doing science and they bring religion into it. We can see like a lot of weird things happen. We've seen that historically happen. So I mean, I'd give that.
Okay, right. So Steve, I want to say one thing is you get that, but that's not true, right? See, Christians do medical things. Christians do science. When you say, well, you don't need a belief in God, that's true, and you don't need a belief in evolution either. You don't need a belief in secular humanism either. So that's not part of the argument. Would be my thing. It's not part of the argument to say, well, we can do this and you can't. Yes, but we do those things. And therefore, it's not a valid argument. So my challenge to you would be, if you're going to make a case one's being superior than the other, there has to be an apples to apples, because both can do the same science. And to go to the extremes, if you're going to go to like Jehovah's Witnesses and things like that with medical, I'm going to agree with you, right? We're going to have a lot of agreement, because they take a wrong view of what Scripture says. They do it out of a cult system, and therefore they're going to come to conclusions that do harm people. But that's not Christianity. So I guess the thing is I'm saying is that you have to see that Christians can do science just without with the claims you're saying, well, you have to bring supernatural into everything. You could do the same science without bringing all the secular humanism in too. Therefore, it's not a comparison. That's just a thought for you.
Stephen, any comments there?
I mean, like, I guess, like, if I spin around, like, if you can answer me how you know that divine truth is being revealed to you by actually God and not a demon, there's no answer to that question.
Sure there is. Sure there is. He's revealed it. We have an objective way to compare. We can look at Scripture. 48 different authors over 1,500 years. No contradictions. Now, here's the thing. You want to use science to be the determining factor for things that are supernatural or immaterial. This is the problem. Science is a study of the material world. So it cannot. You set up an impossible situation. Your situation would be, if I was to turn to you and say, prove to me that your worldview exists. I'm trying to think of a good example of it. But because basically what you want to do is you want to use, well, here, I'll use the example I always give. I want you to tell me how many feet 8 gallons of water weighs. Can you do that?
Well, no, because these two things describe different properties.
Exactly.
But I will also
problem.
point out once more that you can't answer the question. So when I ask you, how do you
did-
know
I
divine
did answer the
revelation is
question.
real, you start talking to
I
me
did.
about divine revelation. So you'll say like, oh,
Okay.
well, the Bible says so. I was like, well, how do you know that's real? Well, because it says it's real.
No,
How
I
do you
didn't.
know
No,
that's real? You
hold
can't
on.
answer
I
that
didn't say
question.
the Bible said so. I've answered this several ways. One, God's made it. He reveals it to everybody. I've given you the fact that we can objectively examine the fact that 40 authors can give over 1,500 years without contradiction descriptions of God. We can look at the fact that there's prophecies given years ahead of time, 750 years sometimes even more, of detailed prophecies that were fulfilled not only in Scripture, but some were fulfilled by men like Alexander the Great. So it's never mentioned as a fulfillment, and yet very detailed is the fulfillment. So I could appeal to all those things. So it has been answered. You seem to ignore the answer and say, well, it can't be answered. The thing you're doing is a category error. You want me to scientifically prove that God exists. Category error. So if you want to know why I can trust the Bible is God's word, because God is not a liar. Therefore, God's not going to lie when he reveals it. The fact that we can objectively examine it, see how the number of authors with no contradiction over years, the fact that we can have prophecy. You can't even have prophecy. You can't even have proper predictions within the science that secular humanists do, because they end up going, oh, nope, we concluded there was one singularity. Nope, that's mathematically impossible. Well, there was Christians that said it was mathematically impossible years ago. But now they wouldn't accept that until they had some other way to explain it. That's called confirmation bias. That's not truth.
Okay. I mean, we could go. I mean, we're like bringing up the whole debate again. I mean, like, the only thing I'll say is it's really funny to say that I'm engaged in a confirmation bias, but you literally say, well, I know God is being truthful to me because by my own definition, God would never lie. I mean, if that's not the definition of confirmation bias, I don't know what it is. But
I'm saying that if you don't first accept God as in the creator of the universe, you can't explain anything. You can't explain your ability to read. You just appeal to, well, we can't know these things. They're just chemical reactions, but you can't explain that. But yet it's a core part of your belief system. For your worldview to be true, these things have to be able to be shown materially. You can't do that. And you have to explain how the universe how the universe exists.
all right, are we good?
Yeah, good.
But thanks. I do appreciate, I appreciate the time, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do too.
All right, thank you guys. I appreciate you for coming on. And I do want to send you guys gifts for your participation. That's what I like to do for guys who come on, or gals who come on and volunteer their time for this discussion. So I'll be contacting you after the show to get information to send you a gift for being so kind
And Steve,
and gracious.
If you want, Steve, you can. I will send you a copy of my book, What Do We Believe, as well, if you want one to know what Christianity actually believes, if you'd be willing to read it. But if you don't want to give me your address, give it to Marlo. I'll send you a copy. Just let him.
Okay.
Let me know.
I want a book.
I'm sending you a book. I said with your book.
I'm messing with you, Andrew. I'm messing with you, man. But I do want to see you guys a gift. So if you guys are willing, I'll contact you guys afterwards to get that. But thank you once again for coming on and debating this subject. And thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Yep. Bye.
All right, that is it for the Gospel Truth. We start talking about these things, secular humanism and Christianity, and that's always a lively discussion because there's so many areas of discussion. And sometimes it can get boggled down, with red herring arguments and things not going exactly to the core issue, but what is the core issue? What is the core issue when we consider secular humanism? It has to be the heart. When we consider the condition of the heart, when we consider the condition of the soul, that those without Christ, that they have, they're separated from the Lord. And that not only affects their soul, their hearts, but that also affects their minds as well. And the only way we can continue to reach that area, is through the gospel. By preaching the gospel and telling them about the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And that's the overall emphasis of the gospel truth. We're engaging the culture of Christian truth through debate, interview, and lessons, but it's all for the purpose of the gospel. And the gospel truth is that Christ died on the cross of Calvary, was buried for 3 days, resurrected with all power, all for the sins, all to deliver us and remove us from the wrath of God, so we would not be under the wrath of God. And it's so glorious and so wonderful to think about that. But I do want to read this verse, Romans 10:9-10. It says that if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart a person believes, resulting in righteousness, and with the mouth he confesses, resulting in salvation. It starts where the heart is at. It starts with the heart. And that heart, that change of heart, that regeneration of the heart causes a favorable response and confession that Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior. And we're just praying at the Gospel Truth that you will believe that you'll believe on the gospel, that you believe that Jesus Christ is the Lord and Savior and he's the Messiah. And we're just praying that, perhaps you're an atheist and perhaps you're watching this debate and you've been sort of going back and forth, you've been doing some studying and stuff, and you're contemplating things. We're just praying that God will touch your heart. Perhaps through this debate, God will touch your heart and cause a change. That's what we hope for. But with that said, that is the gospel truth. And with that said, I do want to rehash some of the upcoming shows I have coming up. October 1st, I have Miles Patrick, and he'll be debating Ricky Crony, and they'll be debating Is Jesus God? The interpretation of Deuteronomy 28, and do we need to obey the law for salvation? October 5th, I have Scarlett Clay versus Gina Belt, and they will be debating Are Christians epistemologically justified to believe in God? October 6th, I have Taylor Gray versus Miles Kettleson, and they'll be debating Can atheism account for objective morality? And finally, I have October 16th, I have Aaron Rodgers versus Armin Navabi, and they'll be debating the value of Christianity. And all these shows start at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, so be on the lookout for that. Look at the promos, and if you have time, go ahead and like and follow my page, The Gospel Truth, and share this content, get it out there so people can hear the gospel, people can hear these arguments, these debates. So, it could play a factor in that presentation of the gospel, so. Also, be on the lookout for my part 2, my second part of the 2-part series of Jesus in the Old Testament. Be on the lookout for that as well. That is coming soon. But once again, I want to thank Andrew. I want to thank Stephen for coming on and being with me and debating this subject. And just be on the lookout for the upcoming shows. Like and follow, share, everything. But with that said, I'm out of here. May God bless you and may God keep you.